I worked the overnight maintenance shift at a self-storage facility for about a year before this happened. Nothing dramatic ever really occurred during those shifts. Most nights were quiet enough that the loudest sound on the property was the humming soda machine inside the office. The reason I took the job in the first place was because I've always been a night person. Working from midnight to 6 a.m. suited me fine, and the pay was decent for what was basically walking around the property a few times a night, making sure nobody was breaking into storage units. The place sat just outside town near an industrial park. During the day, it looked normal enough. Rows of beige metal storage buildings, security gates, and a tiny front office with a flickering fluorescent sign that said Secure Space Storage. But at night, the place felt completely different. Once the gate locked at 11 p.m., the entire property became dead quiet. No traffic, no people. Just rows and rows of storage units stretching into the dark like metal hallways. Most nights I'd sit in the office watching security monitors until it was time to do my rounds. That's where the story starts. The first weird thing happened about 2 weeks into my job. I was doing my usual 2 a.m. walk around the property when I noticed one of the units at the far end of row D had its door raised maybe 2 inches off the ground. It wasn't open, just barely lifted. That wasn't supposed to happen. Company policy said every unit had to be fully locked after hours. I crouched down and shined my flashlight underneath. Nothing but darkness inside. At first, I figured the renter must have closed it wrong earlier in the day. I pulled the door down all the way until it clicked, and then gave it a tug to make sure it was secure. It seemed fine, so I finished my rounds and didn't think much about it. The next night it happened again. Same unit, same 2-inch gap under the door. This time I checked the lock, still secure. That confused me a little because if the lock was on, the door shouldn't have been able to move at all. I closed it again and went back to the office. We had cameras covering the main driveways, but none directly inside the rows of units. Whoever designed the system apparently didn't think that was necessary. Still, it was probably nothing. At least, that's what I told myself. About 4 nights later, something else happened. I was sitting in the office around 3 a.m. when I heard a metallic sound echo across the property. It was faint but clear, like a storage door being lifted. You'd be surprised how loud those doors are in the middle of the night. I checked the monitor showing the gate, still closed. No cars had come in, which meant someone would already have to be inside the property. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out to row D again. Halfway down the row, I already knew what I was going to see. That same unit door was open about a foot now, just enough for someone to crawl underneath. I stopped a few yards away and listened. Nothing. No movement, no voices, just wind brushing against the metal walls. I crouched down again and aimed the flashlight inside. All I could see were stacks of cardboard boxes and what looked like an old mattress leaning against the wall. No person, no movement. I lowered the door again and went back to the office, but this time I logged it in the nightly report. Something about it was starting to bother me. The next week, the pattern continued. Every few nights, same unit, same gap under the door, sometimes 2 inches, sometimes wider. It was always closed when I finished my shift at 6 a.m., which meant it had to be happening during the night. I asked my manager about it one afternoon before my shift started. He pulled up the renter information. The unit belonged to a guy named Daniel Harker, paid 6 months in advance, never late, nothing suspicious. Probably just a warped door. My manager said, those older ones do that. That explanation made sense, at least until the night everything changed. It was around 2:40 a.m. I was doing my second round of the property when I heard the same metallic scraping sound again, but this time it didn't stop. It kept going, like someone was slowly lifting the door. I turned the corner into row D and froze. The unit door was halfway open, and there was someone standing inside, just a dark shape against the back wall. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then the person stepped forward into the light. It was a man, late 30s maybe, scruffy beard, hooded jacket. He didn't look surprised to see me at all. He just stared. "You're not supposed to be here after hours," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He smiled slightly. "I rent this unit." That wasn't technically wrong, but something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. "You still can't be inside the property overnight," I said. "Company policy." He shrugged. "Then I guess I'll leave." He walked past me toward the driveway and disappeared into the dark. I watched him go, feeling unsettled but also relieved that it ended so calmly. That was the false calm. The next night I checked the unit again. This time the door was fully closed, locked, no gap. I figured the situation had resolved itself. Maybe the guy had been secretly sleeping in the unit and decided not to risk it anymore. By the third quiet night, I stopped thinking about it entirely. Until around 4 a.m., I was in the office finishing paperwork when something caught my eye on the camera monitor, one of the hallway cameras inside the front building. A door slowly opening. The door led to the maintenance hallway that connected the office to the restrooms and storage closet. That hallway camera almost never saw movement overnight. I leaned closer to the screen. The door opened wider, and the same man from the storage unit stepped into view. My stomach dropped instantly. There was only one way he could have entered the building. He had been inside the property the entire time, probably hiding in that unit during the day, waiting until night to move around. I watched him walk slowly down the hallway toward the office door, toward me. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I quietly locked the office door, grabbed my phone, and slipped out the back exit that led to the parking lot. From outside, I could still see the office through the glass windows. 30 seconds later, the man stepped inside. He walked directly up to the counter where I'd been sitting. Then he looked around, slowly, like he was confused that I wasn't there. Even from the parking lot, I could see his expression change. He knew I had just left, and he knew I had seen him. That's when I got in my car and drove straight to the police station a few blocks away. The police searched the property later that morning. Inside the storage unit, they found a sleeping bag, bottled water, and a backpack full of tools, bolt cutters, zip ties, duct tape. They never told me exactly what the guy planned to do, but one officer said something that stuck with me. "If you hadn't left when you did," he said, "there's a good chance you wouldn't have walked out of that office." I quit that job the same week. Even now, whenever I drive past rows of storage units at night, I can't help but imagine someone quietly waiting behind one of those metal doors, watching, waiting for the moment someone walks too close. I worked the graveyard shift at a gas station outside Odessa for about 8 months. If you've never driven through West Texas at night, it's hard to explain how empty it feels. The highways stretch forever. The land is flat and dark, and once the sun goes down, the only lights you see are from truck stops scattered along the road. Our station sat about 10 miles outside town, right off a long stretch of highway used by truckers heading toward Midland. During the day, it was busy enough. Oil workers, delivery drivers, the occasional road trip family stopping for snacks. But between midnight and sunrise, most nights I'd go an hour without seeing a single car. That's why I took the job. I was going to community college during the day and needed something quiet where I could study between customers. My shift started at midnight and ended at 6 in the morning. Usually it was just me inside the building with a security camera system and a coffee machine that never stopped humming. For the first few months, nothing strange ever happened. Then the trucks started showing up. The first time I noticed it was around 2:30 in the morning. I was leaning against the counter, scrolling through my phone, when headlights rolled slowly into the parking lot. That wasn't unusual by itself. Truckers stopped by at all hours. What caught my attention was how slow the vehicle was moving. It was an older pickup truck, dark-colored, maybe black or deep blue, the kind you see everywhere in Texas. Dusty, lifted a little higher than normal, wide tires. Instead of pulling up to one of the gas pumps, it just kept rolling. The truck circled the building once, then it drove back toward the highway and disappeared. No one got out, no one came inside. I didn't think much about it at the time. Sometimes people just turned around in our lot if they missed the highway entrance. But the next night it happened again. Same time, same truck. The headlights appeared from the highway, rolled slowly across the parking lot, then looped around the building. Again, it didn't stop at the pumps. Again, it left without anyone getting out. I watched it through the glass doors until the taillights disappeared down the road. That's when I started feeling something I couldn't quite explain. Not fear exactly, just a quiet sense that something wasn't right. Over the next week, the truck showed up 4 more times, always between 2 and 3 in the morning, always doing the same slow circle, always leaving. I started checking the cameras whenever it appeared. The outside camera near the pumps gave me the clearest view. The driver's side window was tinted dark enough that I couldn't really see the person inside. All I could make out was the shape of someone sitting behind the wheel. One night I even stepped outside as the truck rolled past the building. It slowed down slightly when the driver saw me standing there. For a second, I thought it might finally stop. Instead, it kept moving and turned back toward the highway. That was the first time I felt uneasy enough to lock the front door for a few minutes after it left. Out there in the middle of nowhere, you get used to trusting strangers, truckers, travelers, locals. They're all just passing through. But something about that truck didn't feel like someone passing through. It felt like someone watching. About 10 nights after the first time I saw it, the truck finally stopped. It was around 2:40 a.m. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside and looked up from the register. The pickup had parked beside pump number 3. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He looked like he was in his late 30s or early 40s. Tall, broad shoulders, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He walked into the store slowly, glancing around like he was memorizing the place. When he reached the counter, he set a bottle of water down. "Quiet night?" he asked. His voice was calm, friendly even. "Usually is," I said. He nodded and looked toward the back hallway that led to the storage room and restroom. "You work here alone overnight?" That question made something tighten in my stomach. "Most nights," I said carefully. He took a sip from the water bottle. Then he asked something that made the room feel colder. "What time does the security guard come by?" For a second, I just stared at him. We didn't have a security guard. This was a small gas station in the middle of nowhere. I forced a small shrug. "Depends on the night." He studied my face for a moment, like he was trying to decide whether I was telling the truth. Then he smiled slightly. "Stay safe out here," he said. After that, he walked back to his truck and drove away. The parking lot felt much quieter after he left. Too quiet. For the rest of my shift that night, I kept replaying that conversation in my head. Why would someone ask about a security guard unless they were checking whether one existed? The next evening when I came in for my shift, I mentioned it to my manager. He didn't seem too concerned. "Probably just a trucker making conversation," he said. "People ask weird stuff sometimes." I tried to accept that explanation, but 2 nights later something happened that made it impossible to ignore. It was close to 3 in the morning when I stepped outside to empty the trash bins near the ice machine. The wind had picked up, carrying dust across the empty parking lot. The highway lights flickered in the distance, but otherwise the world felt completely dark. As I lifted the trash bag out of the bin, something caught my eye behind the ice machine. At first I thought it was just another bag of garbage someone had thrown back there. But when I looked closer, I saw rope coiled neatly next to a roll of duct tape and a pair of heavy zip ties. I stood there, staring at it for several seconds, trying to convince myself it had some innocent explanation. Maybe someone dropped it. Maybe it was construction equipment. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true, because that exact spot was where the pickup truck slowed down every time it circled the building, like the driver was checking something or hiding something. My hands were shaking slightly when I pulled out my phone and called the police. A patrol car from Odessa arrived about 20 minutes later. I showed the officer the rope and tape behind the ice machine and told him about the truck that kept circling the station at night. He didn't say much while I explained, but his expression changed the moment I mentioned the pickup. "What kind of truck?" he asked. "Older model," I said, "dark-colored, lifted a little." He nodded slowly, like that description confirmed something. Later that morning, after my shift ended, the officer called me back to the station. He told me something I still think about sometimes when I drive late at night. Apparently a similar truck had been seen near several missing person cases along highways across West Texas. Travelers, hitchhikers, people stopping alone at rural gas stations. The police believed the driver had been scouting locations where someone might be working overnight by themselves. When they searched the area later that day, the truck was already gone. No one ever found the driver. I quit that job the following week. Even now, whenever I'm driving late at night and I see a pickup slowly circling a gas station parking lot, I can't help but watch it a little longer than everyone else. Because sometimes the person inside that truck isn't looking for gas. Sometimes they're just trying to figure out if anyone would notice if someone disappeared before sunrise. I worked night security at a hospital in Detroit for a little over a year. Most people think hospital security is intense. Fights in the ER, crazy emergencies, that kind of thing. And sometimes it is. But the night shift is mostly long stretches of nothing. After midnight, the hospital gets quiet. The hallways empty out, visitors leave, and most of the staff are either in the ER or resting in the break rooms between calls. My job was simple. Walk the floors, check doors, watch the cameras, make sure nobody who wasn't supposed to be there was wandering around. The building itself was old, built sometime in the 1960s, and parts of it had been renovated over the years. But one wing on the third floor hadn't been used in a long time. It used to be a surgical recovery ward. Now it was basically storage. Most of the rooms were empty except for old beds, equipment carts, and sealed boxes stacked along the walls. The hospital kept the lights dim in that hallway to save power, and hardly anyone ever had a reason to go up there. Except me, because it was part of my nightly rounds, and because of one room in particular, room 317. The first time I noticed it, I assumed it was just a mistake. It was around 1:40 in the morning when I was watching the security monitors in the basement office. One of the cameras covered the hallway in the old recovery wing. Normally, that corridor looked the same every night, dark, quiet, with maybe 1 or 2 ceiling lights left on for safety. But that night, something was different. The light in room 317 was on. At first, that didn't seem like a big deal. Maintenance workers sometimes used those empty rooms when they were fixing something nearby. Still, it caught my attention because that wing was supposed to stay closed at night. So I pulled up the camera feed from earlier. About 15 minutes before the light came on, the hallway had been completely dark. No one walking past, no doors opening, nothing. Yet somehow the light in that room had turned on. I figured maybe someone from maintenance had gone in through another hallway camera I missed. So I grabbed my radio and headed upstairs to check. The third floor hallway felt colder than the rest of the building. That was the first thing I noticed. Hospitals always have that sterile smell, cleaning chemicals and old air, but this corridor had a different feeling, like it hadn't been used in years. Most of the doors were open, showing empty rooms with stripped beds and covered equipment. When I reached room 317, the light was definitely on, but the room itself was empty. No maintenance crew, no nurses, no one. Just a single hospital bed against the wall and a metal cabinet in the corner. I stood there for a minute looking around before finally turning off the light and closing the door. On the way back downstairs, I convinced myself it was just an electrical issue. Old building, old wiring, stuff like that happens. For the next couple nights, nothing unusual happened. Then the light came on again. This time I noticed it while watching the cameras. The hallway was dark, completely empty. Then suddenly the light inside room 317 flicked on. No one entered, no one left. I rewound the footage 3 times to make sure I hadn't missed something. Nothing. Just an empty hallway and a door that never opened. I went upstairs again to check. Same thing as before. Empty room. Light on. Nothing else. That's when the situation started to bother me a little more than it probably should have. 'Cause lights don't just turn on by themselves. At least not twice. Over the next week it kept happening. Always late. Usually sometime between 1 and 3 in the morning. The light in room 317 would turn on, even though the hallway camera never showed anyone entering. At first I thought maybe the motion sensors were faulty, but those lights weren't motion activated. They were standard switches inside the room, which meant someone had to flip them. After the 5th time it happened, I started reviewing the footage more carefully. That's when I noticed something strange. The door to room 317 would open just slightly before the light came on. Just a few inches, barely noticeable unless you were watching closely. But I still never saw anyone leave afterward. The door would close again, then the hallway stayed empty. That was the part that made no sense, because there was only one door in or out of that room. About 2 weeks after the first incident, I decided to do something I probably should have done earlier. Instead of checking the room after the light came on, I went upstairs immediately. The moment I saw the hallway camera show the door move, I took the stairs 2 at a time and walked down the dim corridor toward room 317. The light was already on inside. The door was slightly open. I pushed it the rest of the way. The room looked exactly like it had every other time. Empty, silent, except for one detail I hadn't noticed before. The ceiling tiles above the bed were slightly out of place. One of them wasn't sitting flat. It was tilted downward just enough that a thin gap showed between the tile and the frame. At first I assumed it was just loose. But then I noticed something else. Dust on the floor directly under the tile, like something had been moved recently. I stepped onto the bed to reach the ceiling and slowly pushed the tile upward. The dark space above it opened like a black hole. For a moment I didn't see anything. Then I heard movement, a slow shifting sound somewhere deeper inside the ceiling, and the faintest sound of breathing. I jumped down immediately and called for backup. Within minutes, 2 more security officers and a maintenance worker were standing in the room with me. Maintenance brought a ladder and moved the ceiling tile aside completely. When they shined a flashlight into the ceiling space, we saw something that made my stomach drop. Sleeping bags, food wrappers, empty water bottles. Someone had been living up there, right above the hospital ceiling, watching everything through the vents and light fixtures. The police were called right away. They eventually found the man about 20 feet down the ceiling crawl space. He had been hiding there for weeks. Apparently he had slipped into the hospital late one night and discovered the unused wing. After that, he started using the ceiling space as a place to stay. The light in room 317 turned on whenever he climbed down into the room to grab supplies or stretch. That's why the camera never showed him entering. He was already inside. After they arrested him, the hospital management thanked us and said the situation had been handled. They sealed the ceiling access points and installed better cameras in the wing. Technically, the problem was solved. But something about the whole thing stayed with me. Because once you realize how easy it was for someone to hide in a building like that, you start wondering how many other places someone could be watching from. I finished that shift, and the one after it. But about a month later, I quit. Now, when people ask why I left hospital security, I usually just tell them I wanted a different job. What I don't tell them is this. Sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I think about those weeks before we found him, about how every night he had been crawling through the ceiling above the hospital, listening to conversations, watching people through vents. And the worst part? There were dozens of rooms in that building with ceilings just like room 317, which means for weeks, we had no idea how many times he had been right above us.